Welcome to the Level Up Artists Podcast. We're your hosts, Adriana and
Jackie Sanders. We are two art professionals sharing forward the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
we talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you'll be notified when we drop a new episode. On today's episode, we're going to discuss a topic that honestly can be applied to many different people at many different phases of life, and that is planning for downsizing. Now, as an artist specifically, this can be applied to maybe you're reacting to a big life change or you're intentionally changing your creative space from one to another. Either way, there's a lot of factors to consider, and there are decisions that you have to make that you want to be able to plan for as far in advance as possible, because this is a very tough decision, or if it's a decision you've already made, there's a lot of unseen factors that we're going to dive into today. Now, the reason we picked this topic is if you've been listening to our handful of recent episodes, we've definitely touched on it multiple times because it's very top of mind for us, in that both of us are moving out of our public-facing studios in downtown Raleigh at Artspace this upcoming summer. So the summer of 2026, due to a contract limit. There's only so many years you can stay there. Very sad to be leaving, but it's a very applicable topic of what does the next chapter look like? So we figured we go ahead and share some of the things that we are considering, decisions that have to be made, and how you may apply them to your journey as well.
Yeah. And it's one of those things too where it's like, it's sad to leave and kind of like, but why do they have a contract limit? And it's like, well, if some folks always stayed there, which of course, we can advocate for wanting to stay as long as you want, but at the same time, by them having those contract limits, it means that they can have other artists come in, right? Like they're allowing a rotation. So it's not like we're being asked to leave after 6 months. Like we're getting a lot of years out of it, which is awesome. So very exciting changes coming, of course. But yeah, we definitely wanted to share about this because it's not just about moving locations. And if we were moving from, one building to another and it was about exactly the same, well, that, it's not that biggie. But these kind of moves definitely have to do a little bit more about like the creative energy, some of the marketing that's involved, some of the long-term planning, and definitely if the space you're moving into is a lot smaller than where you're at, not just slightly smaller, then there's a lot more logistics that come into play. So anyways, we wanted to share kind of like some of the things that we researched about this and we're planning for and things like that. That hopefully can help you with a current or a future, transition. And again, this could apply to like you used to have, the second bedroom of your house, but now there's a newborn going in there. So now you got to move your studio maybe to, a corner of the kitchen instead. So it's like it can apply to a lot of different or you just left university and over in college you had a studio space type situation and now you won't. Like where are you going to put all your stuff? So it can apply to a lot of different things, but we're going to be covering some of the logistics, some of the emotional factors that come into play, some of the marketing, creative energy considerations, and then looking ahead to, the physical space itself, and then a little bit of the financial as well. But with that, Jackie, do you want to kick us off with some of the logistics?
Yes. So I think the logistics are what come first to mind for most people. This is the very practical side. So thinking about things like if you have a current studio space that you are downsizing, what furniture is in there and what are you going to be keeping? What are you going to be selling? Maybe you're going to rehome some of those pieces, whether it's on Facebook Marketplace, donate them to other artists that you know that are looking to expand their studio spaces, or even pass it along to friends. Making those logistics of furniture, okay, what is essential for me to keep versus, okay, what am I just using because it's here? Then also thinking about similar mindset from an art materials inventory standpoint. Now, this can be very hard for many creatives because one of the amazing elements of us is that we think of all the possibilities of what we could do. So we oftentimes can have a little bit of hoarding tendencies of, well, this could maybe one day be useful for this painting idea I had 4 years ago. So you have to really go through your materials, whether it's panels, canvases, paints, markers, all those types of materials, and establish, okay, what supplies am I going to use up before my move? Maybe there's a handful of panels that are like partial done paintings. You're like, you know what? Before this move, I need to officially finish them and list them on my website to sell. Or what things would you rather not transport? In which case, these are materials that maybe I know I have a handful that I bought them for a class in college several years ago at this point, and because I've had this space, there's no reason to get rid of them. But realistically, they're not going to be on my top list of materials to use. So they may be materials that I rehome to other artists that I know work in that medium, if they're still good at this point. What things do you want to avoid having to transport to the new location just because you know you'll never use them?
Yeah, no, for sure. And this is one of those things where it's like it's tough, but it's probably easiest, especially for, to take off the pressure and for those materials that you still feel connected to, but have to make the hard decision to get rid of. I think this is also going to be, maybe a little bit more challenging for those of you that may be moving to a different country, where shipping is just, out of the question, and you definitely have to downsize. But it's one of those things like the earlier you start, the better. So that you'll have more time to break it into phases, Marie Kondo it, if you will, and be like, does this spark joy or not? Am I going to use this or not? Am I going to, purge this? Am I going to pack it? I'm going to, store it for later, donate it, etc. For this, something that's going to come in super handy, I would say, obviously, bins and boxes, of course, but also think about having some sort of label. This could be as easy as tape, obviously, but labeling, if you have any kind of rolling cart you already use in your practice, it's going to come in handy. Anything else that you have that's mobile, any dollies and things like that are going to be super helpful when you start moving stuff around. I'm going to bring back the bins for a second too. That can also be helpful to help you decide, even while you're still using the studio, which things you want to move to a storage unit, or if you have an alternate, maybe in your garage or spare room or whatever, for you to label them on the outside and then be able to see at a glance, like, okay, this is something I'm going to keep. But you're making the decision relatively early. You're not trying to like, hey, I gotta finish doing the studio in a few hours, and now I have to like literally slam everything into boxes and it's all mixed up. Doing this earlier on, it'll let you just kind of put it into categories, whatever that might look like for you. But yeah, the earlier you start, the better for sure.
Yeah, and I think the key thing for this, which you touched on, Adriana, is like start as early as possible and almost doing it in phases of like there's always, okay, there's 2 to 3 things, whether it's furniture or materials that you know, okay, I really don't need to move this. But it's kind of those gray area, either objects or materials that might take a little bit more time as the moving date or physical space changeover happens, become more clear. And so if you're stressing over the logistics of moving space, some really helpful questions to ask yourself is like, what materials have been sitting around untouched for weeks, maybe even months? And do they really need to move with me? Also asking like which pieces of furniture or storage truly support my creative flow and which are just taking up space. Also, if I had to move everything in one weekend, what would I regret dragging into my new studio? And I think that can be a good pulse for what should move and what shouldn't. There's, of course, a lot of just very practical items, but also, will you be excited to open this type of material when you get to your new studio? Are you going to say, oh my goodness, I can't wait to find the new home for this charcoal set or these paints? What boxes are you going to be excited about? And that can be a really good indicator of the logistics behind moving. Now, on the complete opposite side, there's also an emotional side. So, Adriana, what about the emotional things to consider with a downsize or creative studio move?
I think that's actually a lot of times what you need the additional time for, because it's not necessarily the supplies, like yes, bins and I mean, if you have like friends or family to help you out, even if you had to move in a weekend, it can go relatively fast. I think it's the purging side of it when you look at it from an emotional standpoint that it can be a really tough. And trying to balance like honoring the things that you've acquired over time, the space you've been in, and trying to figure out like, okay, for the space itself, like documenting it. If you have photos, videos, sketchbooks, things, maybe like that's one way to process. Leaving the space is to like to document it. Another one is to celebrate some of the milestones you've had in the space. So reflecting on some of your favorite projects, collaborations, event that happened there, maybe like series that came as a result of being there. But yeah, definitely the emotional side can definitely be tough. So like the earlier you start processing some of this, I think the better for sure.
Yeah, and I think to your point, it does sound a little woo-woo, but one thing that I found has been very helpful, both with my creative spaces and even just like where I live, is to have a closing ritual of some kind. I get very emotionally attached to spaces that I live in or make work in. And so having that way of saying almost goodbye to a space, whether it's with one last piece of art that you make in it, or again, sounds very woo-woo, but having like a journal entry or even a letter to the space, acknowledging all the milestones that you hit there, how special it was, kind of just putting a ribbon on the end of that experience. I will say there have been many spaces where I'm like crying, like thanking this space for all of the memories and moments and lessons um, before I leave. And it feels one a little bit dramatic, I will say. You feel like you're in like a rom-com movie, but it is very, very helpful. Because I think it's important too to acknowledge the growth that you have in each of your spaces and why this wasn't a pivotal space for your creative practice. Whether it's this is really the space that kicked off my creative journey. It proved to me the importance of having a daily practice or a weekly commitment to my creative space. Maybe you got your first solo show there. Maybe you met your art bestie there. Maybe you had like Zoom meeting check-ins with friends. Whatever it is, maybe there's a medium that like you discovered you love this and completely pivoted your body of work. There's always those wins in this space and why they'll hold a special place in your heart, and why they really shaped your identity as an artist. So it's very important, I say, before you leave and get stuck in the logistics of moving and scheduling and just getting out of your one space to the other out of urgency, is to slow down and really acknowledge that growth because that can be super, super powerful.
Yeah, yeah. And a few questions that, can help guide you through this part of the process is to say, how has this space shaped my creative identity and practice? What do I want to document or memorialize before I leave? Any moments, projects, collaborations? What kind of goodbye would be meaningful to give closure to it? I would also add to that, and this is like on the practical side of things and tying back to what I said earlier about documenting. I mean, your space is going to look a lot different if there's like boxes all around. I mean, try to take like some photos or videos, or if you want to like have a message that you want to record or anything like that on the space before you start wrecking through it. I'll just kind of say that. But yeah, definitely like ask yourself, like, what has it meant to you, to be in that space? Even if this was like more of a residency type situation and it was on a shorter term, but definitely if you've been there long term, like what has it meant to you? For sure.
Yeah, and I think that perfectly ties in with the marketing component of it too. Because especially if you've been sharing either on Instagram, pictures on your newsletter of like behind the scenes of work coming to life in that space, if you've been doing Instagram stories, YouTube videos, any type of content you've been sharing with your friends, family, collectors, and future collectors, it is so important to also bring them along this journey with you. Obviously, that can be in whatever degree you want. You don't necessarily have to vlog the entire day one, day two packing, you certainly can if you want, and I will definitely watch it if you do. But it can be important to just announce, hey, this is a shift that's coming, versus I've followed a few creatives where all of a sudden they're just like in this brand new space. They didn't acknowledge it whatsoever. I'm like, do you live there now? Is this like a short-term studio space? What's going on? So if you do share on a regular basis and it's going to be kind of a drastic shift, I think it's also important to acknowledge that with your audience. So your email list is a great place to do that. Maybe you can give them some of those sneak peeks, whether it's a public facing studio that you're going to, even if it is just, okay, you're moving from one bedroom of your house to the other. Inevitably, as we'll touch in after this, there's going to be some type of creative shift also. So it can be very powerful from your audience standpoint to see, oh, this shift is coming, so that's why there's this new body of work, or this is a shift in perspective. So it kind of brings them in on the journey and makes them feel like they have like inside scoop of it.
Yeah, yeah. And this is one of those things like maybe moving from one bedroom to another might not have that much of a shift, but like say you live in the mountains and you're moving to the coast, suddenly there might be a lot more water inspired stuff happening in your work, or there's like an artist that I follow who moved to a chateau in France and her work shifted with it. And obviously like part of the story she was sharing on social media had to do with the logistics of moving to France, of course, but then also like renovating this old giant house and like all the cool stuff that she found while she was there and the patterns that now show up in her work. I don't know, like there's more stuff that can go with it. So from a social media slash online storytelling side of things, you can add things like not just about like packing with me or studio memories, but you can also have like what's next, like interesting stuff about the location you're going to, or like little discoveries you're finding through the process, which is super cool. But then also you can incorporate some sort of call to action with it for your audience where you're encouraging them to follow you, into this new season, this new space. Maybe you're going to tie in like buy work now before I move, or if you're going to tie in some kind of promotional thing or a series release, that ties in either to leaving the space you're in or tied to the new series you're doing at your first place. Like, ask them to sign up for updates, maybe like commissions, whether you're going to put them on hold or ask for commissions before the move, or say, once I move, commissions will reopen at this time, however long it is after you move. So there's like different options in there that you can incorporate as part of your overall message. And I mean, if you're moving way ahead of time, then you have even more time to plan some of these things and kind of schedule out when you want to release them in anticipation of, and not try to do it the weekend that you're moving out of the studio.
Yeah, preparation overall is key. And I think the thing to ask yourself is, how can I bring my audience into this transition so that they feel like they are part of the journey? What stories can I share now that will set up the excitement for the next chapter? What's one clear action I want my audience to take before or during this move? Maybe there are art pieces you're looking to sell so that you don't move them to the next studio space. Maybe you want them to sign up for your newsletter in order to get behind the scenes footage or pictures of the move. And to your point, Adriana, maybe there's commissions that will be affected, whether they're on hold. Maybe you're going to open up, okay, a limited 3 commissions and they'll be done by this date. So there's a lot of things to think about when looping your audience in, but it can also just be so exciting because they will be excited and invested in the journey too. And the start of this next creative chapter, which fits perfectly with the shift in creative energy that you have to factor in as an artist.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, that's when you got to think about maximizing the time that you have left, especially if it's like major downsizing, right? Space wise. So are there any special projects that you can only do in this current space? Whether it has to do with murals or has to do with the scale, maybe the type of messy materials, or I mean, actually, it could be hazardous materials if you're using, something that's noxious and the space you're in maybe has vents, but you're moving to one that doesn't, right? Or the space you are in right now, you can work with oils and solvents and, some of this smellier stuff, if you will, a little more toxic stuff. And now you're moving to a smaller shared space where you can't use these materials, right? Or the equipment you have now versus later. So it's like there's some logistics with that projects wise. For those of you that do clay, are you moving somewhere that doesn't have a kiln, but you had a kiln before? Or you had CNC machinery and now you don't, or engravers or whatever. So it's like there's that side of it of like, okay, based on the amount of time I have left, how many of these projects do I want to wrap up? Will I have access to the space, these machineries, these vent systems, whatever that looks like for you. Another way to look at it is also experimentation side of things to say like, okay, this is like my last chance to just play around in this space before the restrictions of the next space. And I think for this one, a lot of it that can come to play, or one of the examples is like if you had a bigger space, let's say where the floor was already full of paint spackles and it's a space where nobody cares if there's more paint on, and let's say your next studio space is somewhere carpeted, then maybe flinging around paint all over the place is no longer going to be practical. Or if you're using machinery and now you're moving into something that's more of a shared office space, you're not going to be bringing a wood saw with you. Just kind of thinking about that, like what else can you play with, experiment with, and or wrap up or finish before the move.
Yeah, I think that is so important and probably part of the anxiety that a lot of creatives get with move of, well, how is this going to change my creative energy? No artist wants to feel limited, and big shifts will inevitably shift our creative energy. So with those last experiments and projects and using materials, I think it's also so important to document those works in progress to kind of capture the feel of your studio space before you completely start packing it up and moving its magic somewhere else. But also identifying, okay, what practices do you want to leave in this space and maybe celebrate them before you leave? And then what are ones that you do want to carry over into your new environment? Maybe what are experiments that you are excited to start anew from? Yes, if you're downsizing space, there may be a limitation on material. To your point, if you used to be in a woodworking shop and now you're going to be in a smaller space with less tools, that's going to shift the work that you make. But potentially, downsizing could mean you have less physical working space, but then maybe that allows you to have more time or community connections to join an out-of-home woodworking shop. So it's not your solo studio, but you have access to more tools. So just things to think about of what do you want to leave in this current chapter? What do you want to bring to the next one? And what opportunities await for you in the next space that you're going to have as your creative studio?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, some questions to think here would be like, what projects have you always wanted to try in the space but haven't yet? So in the case of the space of the kiln, right? Like if you've never used the kiln and you still have 6 months on that lease and you've always wanted to try it, maybe this is the time to do it, right? Before you move somewhere that may not have kiln. Another question to ask is, what do I want, my last works in the space to like, how do I want, if you want to, how would you like the last pieces created in the space to reflect the energy of your time spent there? If this is something you choose to like to do, what habits, routines, or energy do you want to leave behind when you move? And this one's interesting because let's say you have a specific routine of what you do when you get in the studio before a session each time. What are some of these things that you're going to be able to carry over into your new space versus have to adapt versus have to leave behind? And I mean, it's interesting, like Jackie, you mentioning like what kind of practices you want to leave behind. I'm sure anybody that's listening that maybe is like a digital artist that just works on on an iPad is like chuckling, going, I just take the iPad with me. Um, doesn't matter what size the space is really, but No, seriously, just think about like it's not just the actual things you're creating themselves, it's also like how the space you're moving into can affect some of that workflow. Like if you had a nice studio mini fridge that you always went to, and or like your coffee maker in the studio and you always made your coffee before a session, you know, whatever, versus the space you're going to move into. Just kind of like how some of these other things besides the practice itself are going to change a little bit. Not necessarily for the worse, by the way, because if you didn't have a fridge in your studio, now you're moving to a home studio. Oh, hello. Now you have your fridge. You know, like you can get snackies anytime. So pros and cons, but definitely evaluating you know, what kind of things you want to again wrap up before the move for sure.
Yeah, and I think from a more logistic standpoint too, there are other considerations, right? It's not just, okay, the physical move itself, but really when looking ahead, especially if you haven't made the decision on if you're going to move your creative space or where you're going to move your creative space, there are a lot of factors to consider with that too. Which I think is most important to talk about because these are again, the logistics that will have a ripple effect in not only your creative life, but also your personal financial life too. So thinking about things like, okay, what are your overhead changes? Thinking about, okay, will my studio space rent go up and down? Will I have additional utilities or rental fees that I will have to consider into my finances? Will there be a longer or a shorter commute to my creative space? This especially can really affect your creative energy and kind of the logistics of when and how you create your work. If you're used to having a studio space at home, maybe in one of your bedrooms, where you can make work in the morning, in the evening, whenever it feels right, and then you decide to move your studio to an external public facing space, will you still want to create work after a 20-minute commute sitting in traffic? That's something to really consider of is this move valuable and helpful for my business, for my creative energy? And how will that affect the creative pressure of the work that I'm making, especially if the financial costs, whether from a monthly standpoint, from your annual expenses, there is that inevitable pressure of, oh, well, now I have rent. It's not my second bedroom of my home where it's kind of built into your mortgage or built into your regular rent. So that does add a form of pressure. Not saying it's good or bad, but it's something to factor in. And also just that mindset shift. Like, do you want less financial pressure on your creative practice? Because oftentimes, which I've definitely learned over the years, is the second you really rely fully on a creative practice to pay the rent for a certain space, or you have to break even for this element, it can really change your creative energy, where oftentimes less financial pressure often can feel like more freedom in your creative practice, which ultimately can create work that people connect with. So, do you thrive with that accountability? Do you like those like high pressure factors? Or does your lifestyle and income change the way that these factors interplay with your decision? All things to think about.
Yeah, and honestly, that's a good point you brought up because sometimes the move isn't just moving studios, it's actually moving, like it could involve moving apartments or moving homes. So maybe the space you had available was a second bedroom or, you know, a bigger space in the house. But let's say you're moving into an apartment in a city where you don't have space at all for your studio. Your downsizing might not just be like going from a studio to a house. It might actually be going from the house to a studio space outside of your house that's smaller and maybe even more expensive than like having that extra room. I mean, this is a scenario that happens because sometimes that studio move is part of you moving cities, not just moving studios. So, anyways, I'm glad you brought that up. That is something to definitely think about. Yeah, yeah, no, I think a lot of times we'll focus on the move of the studio itself, but not necessarily how the move of the studio is predicated by moving homes too. So
Hmm.
definitely something to think about. I think in this category too, it's also important to define some of the essentials, like what are some non-negotiables for a creative space going forward? Is it the light? Is it storage, accessibility? Do you need a sink? Do you need a kiln? Do you need a CNC, like a woodworking machine, things like that? Do you need the vents, like we talked about earlier? Um, there are some things that maybe are not as critical, but maybe from a mental health kind of thing, or maybe not mental health, just call it a preference. Like for me, I'm like, I need a sink and I need a window. I don't have to have a window. I don't have to have a sink because there's other ways to, clean brushes and whatnot. But I'm like, if I'm gonna pay, especially if I'm gonna go to somewhere that's smaller and pay more than I pay now, I definitely want a sink and I want a window. I don't know. Those are just like, things that they're not non-negotiables, but I would consider them essentials for me. Um, Even more important than like, oh, and obviously this also means like if you're working large, do you need a loading dock? Do you need to make sure if you work on giant panels that that things fit through doors? Depending, like, are you going to a big warehouse space and you can get giant things off, out of your space, or no, you're working now out of a smaller building, or office or whatever, and all you have is a smaller elevator. How are you going to get your larger pieces out? So there's, oh, those of you that work in like larger sculpture, are you in a second floor that can't support the weight of what you're building? There's that one too, that we don't think about, but those of you that work with stone know about that one. Anyway, so there's a little bit more, of course, there's the financial, the overhead, the mindset, but definitely like some of the things that help you do what you do. And some of the other building blocks with this is to establish, what are the foundations of your next studio or living arrangement, starting with your values, not just from the square footage. So that's where I think like it's not just about how much bigger or smaller the new space is in, is also like what's available. Because some of that downsizing, it could be just not just about like the size itself. Maybe it's even similar, but then the, what's it called? Maybe like the way that this room is set up, or columns are set up, or just like I went from a big square and now it's this weird L shape. Like, what else like are you gonna have to fit around, or maybe it won't fit. And anyways, there's a little bit more involved, but trying to identify what some of those main things that you want, features wise, but also like equipment wise, I think kind of comes into play here. Or if you're the kind of artist that you have a big easel and you need to have certain dimensions to fit it, all that kind of stuff. But the earlier you get into all this planning, the better, for sure.
Yeah, preparation is definitely the key for all of it. And with the physical and financial planning, really asking yourself, okay, how will these changes in overhead costs affect my creative pressure or create more creative freedom? What are the non-negotiables for my future creative space, such as the light, storage elements, location, size, access to tools, all of those things? And thinking about if I had to rebuild my studio from scratch, what are the three things that I would want to prioritize? And looking at those things when you're thinking about the possibility of different creative spaces moving forward.
Oh yeah, for sure. So next up, we're gonna be talking about our plans post Artspace, but first, we're gonna put in a quick word from our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by our Level Up Artist resources.
We understand that life as a modern artist can be both exciting and overwhelming. Plus, there's a lot of information out there, but what do visual artists actually need?
We've spent countless hours of trial and error, weeding through tons of information to find the gold so that you don't have to waste time going down those endless rabbit holes.
We created a library of PDF resources with bonus videos that cover everything from artist documents to exhibition prep, social media to technology, sales strategies, and artist mindset, several templates, and more.
Ready to get started? Head on over to levelupartists.com/shop to level up your creative career today. Welcome back, everyone. So, we want to talk about a little how this topic applies to us. I think it is definitely top of mind for both of us and a handful of other artists that are all moving out of our studio at the same time. So, Adriana, what are your studio plans post Artspace Studio?
So I think I need a box of tissues for this. I'm kidding, I'm kidding. Um, there's a few options that I'm weighing right now. One of them would be working from home, while also having an existing storage unit and possibly adding an enclosed trailer that I can pull with my car, for some of the mural tools. Not the paint because it's not. They wouldn't survive in the heat or the cold. So that's definitely one of the things I'm thinking about. I already do have a spare bedroom that I use as a home studio. Not the same as the Artspace one at all. All my good stuff is over at Artspace, all my easels that are Artspace and things, but I just use it for like smaller, some sketching and whatnot right now. And before Artspace, I did use that as my full-blown studio. So that's something I'm thinking about, like how to balance the storage slash transportation plus, that existing space. But honestly, I miss being out with other people or being around other artists. I find it super helpful, especially being able to exchange ideas. I know that if I go with a home studio option, like, yes, I could do artist dates and things like that, but I like having a space outside the house. Um, I find it healthier and more helpful, and it also gives me a space where I can meet my clients. Where I live is semi-rural, so asking a potential, commission client to come out into the boonies where I live, I'm like, that's not very practical. So I'm currently on the search for another studio space. At the time of this recording, we still have more than 6 months before we're moving, but I still haven't found one. I've visited a few places. There's one that's north of the city. It's still in Raleigh, North Carolina, but it's north of the city, and they already house another arts nonprofit inside of it. Different setup from the one that we're in, but they do have some spaces available. Um, I'm like a little bit I'm a little bit torn with it. It's not like they're gonna have, if I go with this space option, it's not like the kind of place that would be activated for a first Friday or even special events or things like that. So that
Hmm.
means that from a marketing standpoint, I'd have to be fully responsible for getting all of the foot traffic, just like I would if it was my house, all of the foot traffic or Facebook ads or whatever I'd have to do to try to get people to come into the space. um there being other artists there means that there's a possibility I could coordinate and like we could try to do a date together, so we're doing like joint promotions going on. But I mean, they have parking, so versus downtown it's a lot easier to park. Space is smaller, rent would be higher, and I'm pretty sure it's carpeted. So I'm like, it's I'm just gonna say I'm still searching. It's an option. What's the name of the place? Traeger building? Don't quote me on that. I'm like, I gotta look at the pronunciation again. It has like a weird name. It's like an office
Okay.
park. It's like an industrial office park. So still searching for another space. But yeah, my preference would be, again, I don't have to be super picky with the space itself. Again, if I have a window, I'd be happy. If it has a skylight, I think I'd be happy. If it's like fully enclosed, no windows anywhere, I think I would not like that. Carpeted, I would not like that. No sink anywhere in sight. I definitely would not like that. And if they have a kiln somewhere, which the space I'm looking at does not have a kiln, so I'd have to make a different arrangement for ceramics. But um, if there's at least a building somewhere nearby, I could firework if I wanted to, then I could make do without having a kiln in the space itself. It would make it super inconvenient, but it's not a deal breaker. So still
Yeah.
searching. What about you, Jackie?
Yeah, I think similar to the energy that you shared, what I am finding and what many of us at Artspace are finding, since a lot of us are leaving at the same time, is the lack of studio spaces in Raleigh. which I think is very prominent in most cities, really. I mean, artists just need big empty rooms and places to create. But to your point, where we have a studio, which is we started as Artspace super fans before we had studios there, and then we moved in. And I am finding, especially now, I mean, they are such an incredible nonprofit for so many reasons, but especially for the grants and the donors that they get to make the rent very affordable for artists in downtown. So that when you have a studio space there, when moving out, inevitably the theme is the same. Like your space is going to be smaller and you're going to be paying more. So, very grateful for the time that we've had currently. But it is definitely a wake-up call when thinking about the future. So, that's been
And the
honestly,
income.
yeah, that's been a big factor that I've been thinking about is very stuck in logistics, which is no surprise. But especially when it comes to finances, over the past year, my income has been less than consistent with selling art, doing mural commissions, but also kind of piecing together a handful of different part-time and contract work positions, all very wonderful and rewarding in their own way, but financially has been pretty tight with piecing together multiple small incomes, right? It's different than having a full-time corporate job like I had when I moved into Artspace, and that essentially covered the rent if I needed it to. I never had to, but it was nice to have that safety net. So, that being said, the past 6 months when I've been thinking about like, okay, it's one more year of art space, so what am I gonna do after? My opinions have really been across the board. I've thought about pivoting to a home studio setup, at least for maybe a little while, whether it's 6 months, whether it's a year. One, to reduce the overhead, because I mean, that's monthly rent that I'm no longer going to have to be paying for an external space. But also, two, to really recalibrate my creative vision. Over the past year, my creative energy has really been stifled because of financial stresses. And I think that is very okay and honestly honest to admit. So I don't even know, okay, what are the essentials of my art practice right now? Where do I want my creative energy and vision to go next? I really don't know. And so then also putting financial pressure of another studio space that's more expensive on top of that is a lot of pressure. However, I'm also in a 500 square foot condo. So having a studio space in here would look very different than it would at Artspace. Essentially, would be very much downsizing to a desk in the corner, um, which could be okay, as I'm reassuring myself, because I am going more digital. My creative practice started as like pen and paper daily drawing, so it may resort back to that as I'm kind of replenishing the creative vision. And then pivoting to a studio space when I have, okay, this is the body of work I want to make, and this is the type of space I need. Let's go out and find it so I can make this body of work, you know? But with a change in contract work coming up, my income factors are going to change, which we're very excited for. And I'm essentially I'm giving myself the deadline of March to decide because my contract ends in the end of June, so the start of July, meaning realistically, if I sign a contract anywhere else, I'd probably want to let them know or have to sign by May for like a June/July move in, which I guess it would logistically have to be June because our lease ends in July.
Yeah, you don't want to pay rent three
Right.
months overlapping on both
Right. So
places.
to minimize the overlap of rent, but also, okay, June is when I would move into the new space, meaning I have to sign it in May, which
Hmm.
means I'd have to know by April, which means I have to decide by March.
Oh
So
yeah.
I'm allowing myself the next like 5 months with this income shifting and like kind of as we talked about earlier in this episode, like what projects do you want to prioritize before you downsize? For me, that really means like leaning into my daily creative practice again. and embracing what that looks like without any pressure of output. But really just reconnecting with the energy of, okay, determining by March, what does my creative practice need and what does that look like? I am excited about the possibility of more of a worker space. I do not want to have a public facing studio again. From a daily standpoint, like, don't get me wrong, I love interacting with the public, but kind of what you were talking about, Adriana, I want a space where it wouldn't be weird for me to bring a collector or maybe host my own small event for collectors, but I don't necessarily want to be doing First Friday every month. I don't want to be kind of showcasing my creative space all of the time anymore. I think I need a little bit of a break from that. So thinking
And that
more of
comes from an extrovert. That comes from
right.
an
And that comes from
extrovert.
an extrovert. But creatively, I'm almost more introverted. Like, I don't like a lot of input on my creative practice while I'm
Mhm.
making it. I like it at the end and I want to celebrate it. But when I'm mid-process, I don't like people's input all of the time. I don't want to
Mhm.
like even like making art as like studio dates with other artists, like, oh, let's like both work on projects together. I never get anything done or nothing that I'm excited about, which I was the same way in college. I'm like, I was not the one who could like group study with friends. I was like, you're distracting me because my extrovert is so high that I'm like, I either have to be working or socializing. I cannot do both. And I've just accepted that about myself. So, but I like the idea of having a worker space in terms of maybe more industrial, maybe pivoting in terms of medium of woodworking or metal or getting very sculptural. So I love the idea of that kind of being a beginner again in a new challenge, learning new tools. So I think, and for me, to your point, what you were saying earlier, like I think that would justify the increase in cost if I had access to more creative exploration with this space, which would definitely be a definitive new chapter for me. So we shall see. More to come.
I know. I'm like, there will be an episode with an update. I'm like, before we move, we will let you all
Yeah.
know what ended up happening and kind of like give you a quick update. Especially for those of you that might be listening that live in our area or thinking of
Mm.
moving to our area, then we can kind of give you an idea. But I mean, real quick, it's like where we are, studio space wise, there's Artspace in downtown Raleigh. There's Anchor Light, though getting in there, it's a little bit of a different if when you can get in. I don't know that they have limitations on leases, so they might not have as many openings as we're about to have. And then there's a few other buildings that are mixed use that have artists. And then I think the closest thing to art space, like being open to the public and stuff, would be Golden Belt in Durham, which
Hmm.
at least for me, that's an hour from my house. So that's not going to happen. And I know Hillsborough has their own thing too, like open, like shared studio buildings. But outside of that, there's not, considering the number of artists that we know in our area that would want a studio space, there's not as many spots available. Like
Yeah.
buildings for artists. I mean, you can always get a commercial lease, but that's also like why we're talking to you guys about this, because commercial lease is a whole nother bag of chips than trying to get a space that's already for artists.
Yeah.
Leases
And I
tend to
think
be a lot more flexible for artists, yeah.
yeah, and those factors, and I mean, that could be a whole episode in itself. Maybe come April, May, we could do an
When we
episode
make
of
our
like,
decision.
these are all of, yeah, after we've already signed our leases, then it's like, okay, here's all the places we were considering. Because yeah, even something as like, if you get a storage unit that's interior with, that's weather controlled and 24-hour access, I've seen people online that kind of like build fake walls in there. They get a large storage unit and that becomes their studio. Or there'll be a handful of spaces that it's part gallery, and then they have maybe one or two studio spaces that are designated for an artist in residence, for a short-term rental, if they want an exhibiting artist to have a place there. But those are less, yeah, you really have to know your area. So whether you're
Oh
in
yeah.
Raleigh or different cities, there are kind of the quote unquote like main places where you're like, oh, there's 10 artist studios here, or there's 20 artist studios. And then it's kind of a puzzle of, oh, well, then there's two over here, there's one over here. This could kind of work as a studio, but it could also be a coffee shop. Who knows? Like, there's a
Yeah.
lot going on. It's a lot of factors to consider, which can be very overwhelming.
I know. I know. I'm like, I just thought about like, some people will build it in their backyard, a studio in their backyard, or they'll convert like one of those like garages where there's a room upstairs and that's where their studio moves. I'm like, it's like unlimited kind of factors, but we'll end up sharing with you guys like in a future update, kind of like what we looked at, and kind of like what we decided on. Just to give you like the solid the solid conclusion to what we ended up going with. But as we wrap up, a few reminders is like preparing for any big life change, whether it's moving homes and studios, or just moving studios. Like, it's part logistics, it's part emotional, it's part vision and intention and all that kind of good stuff. So try not to get too bogged down by just one of the elements of it. I know logistics can be like stressful and like it's hard, but try to give a little bit of attention to the others too. And it's kind of like bittersweet, or could be bittersweet. Maybe you are happy to be moving studios to something smaller and you're not paying out of the what on something too expensive that wasn't the right fit. So maybe you are going to something that's like smaller and a better fit. But yeah, it can also be exciting, to transition into another space and allow yourself to feel both the terror, I'm kidding, but the anxiety, or the worrying part of like moving, but then also the excitement. I mean, it's sweet and sour, right? It's both. So I don't know, just enjoy it, just go through the process, and whatever happens. Like, artists, we're pretty resourceful, so even if you end up just working out of a closet, like you're gonna figure out how to make it work.
Yeah, exactly. Artists are resourceful and oftentimes resilient. So, whether you're moving out of a space, moving into a new space, or really just reimagining where you are, it's definitely remember that it's an opportunity to align your space with what your creative goals are. Making sure that it's a good fit, not only for now, but where you want to go, can be a super empowering and exciting feeling. So, whatever you choose, just embrace the process, the possibility, and maybe the growth that comes from this big change.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up today's episode, and hope you enjoyed it.
As always, our blog will be linked on today's show notes, where you will find episode notes and links to all of our other podcast episodes.
If you want to stay connected with us between episodes, share your feedback, or have a question you would like for us to answer on the podcast, you can reach us through social media. I'm at ameighart across all platforms.
And I'm at jsandersstudio on all platforms. And if you want to follow the podcast, we are at levelupartists on Instagram.
You can also visit Level Up Artists to get immediate access to templates, resources, and course modules to level up your creative career today.
Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you in the next episode.